and I'm just going to say something provocative here real quickly.
Positively provocative.
Everyone has been trained in active listening, and I think summarizing what the client said for clarification is an overused skill.
Welcome, and today I am having Robert Biswas-Diener as my colleague and friend on this particular podcast. And it's not so easy to introduce you, Robert, because there are so many things. So I will start with Dr. Robert Biswas-Diener is a researcher, author, and well-known executive coach. As a consultant and trainer, Robert has presented in 30 nations and worked with many different, very different clients. Really, in 2024, Thinkers 50 recognized Robert as one sharing, being present on that list. And you are also known for publishing over 70 academic articles and chapters on happiness and other positive topics. I like that, positive topics. Your research interests culture and education. You also are the author of 9 positive provocations and radical listening. And some call you the Indiana Jones of positive psychology and coaching. Do you like that?
Not really. No.
No. I was wondering, reading that, it was like, okay. So, if there were a hero or heroes, who would you like to be called as, if not Indiana Jones?
Oh, wow. Maybe the Jane Goodall of
That's good. That's good.
I think she's Indiana Jones is mythical, but Jane Goodall kind of did the same thing. Like she put herself out there and showed up and just tried to discover something, and she's real world. I think she's a better example.
Yeah, that's a great example and quite a figure for sure, and doing so much good in the world. So executive coach, but also you are a researcher. Which part? I mean, I know they're in one person, but is there either side of it that you like better, or do they inform one another? How does it go?
Magda, this is so great. You're already asking me. I think no one has ever asked me that question, so you're already asking me great questions. I love it. I really feel like I have to fulfill both sides of those things. Like as a researcher, I have such great opportunities to cultivate my intellectual hunger, and I'm really like constantly expanding my web of knowledge. I mean, I think all people do this through reading and training and things like that. But as a researcher, you're sort of doing it full time. It is your job. And if I go too long without a research project, I feel a sense of atrophy. But if I'm just doing the research and just sort of building up my intellectual capacity, it also feels like it's missing something. And I do have what many coaches have, that kind of desire to serve, that desire to help and make an impact. And that's where I love the applied side, the coaching side, the training side. So I have to do both. And sometimes I prioritize one or the other, but I can't go too long.
Wow, that's great. And actually, in your book, Positive Provocations, the dedication is for my students who give me meaning. Do you care to share a little bit more about it? When I first saw it, I was like, oh. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's the only book I've written that I don't think I have dedicated to my wife or principally been thinking about as my wife. Hopefully she's not mad about that. It took me a while to realize, but I sort of think that I'm on earth to teach. And in fact, I tell people I'm a much better coach trainer than I am a coach. And I freely admit that. I mean, I think I'm a pretty good coach, but I think I'm a very good coach trainer because I think so much about how people learn, how to communicate complex ideas effectively. And so really, it's the thing that I love the most is any time that I'm teaching people, and I don't necessarily mean lecturing people, I mean facilitating. Yeah.
Yeah, so it is really an interesting combination of research, applied coaching, and teaching or training as well. That's a pretty good combination, I guess, and I'm sure that your students are especially appreciating the pragmatic side of you being a coach, but also the research that underpins so much, I'm sure, of what you are teaching. I know that we promised our listeners to talk about your most recent book, Radical Listening, but I can't help but bring your previous book to the attention of our listeners, and it is Positive Provocation. I have a copy signed by Robert. So there you go. I shared with you, and I'm happy to share with everybody else that I was giggling reading this book because there are still myths in coaching about do's and don'ts, non negotiables, absolutes, which is kind of interesting in the context of coaching, which really points to change, transformation, evolution. So what got you to writing a book about about coaching and 25 questions to elevate coaching practice?
Yeah, great question. This book actually, in large part, was born out of an ICF event. The ICF brought me in to an event in Arizona where I was asked to be the provocateur, sort
Right.
of like an MC of sorts. But instead of just being an MC, I wasn't just introducing the next speaker. It was really to me about, can I challenge people in the audience? Can we think deeper? How do we stretch ourselves? And I thought, well, this is exactly what coaches do. We think that when we work with clients, we're trying to stretch their perspective, help them see in new ways.
Mm.
And yet I think we too seldomly do that for ourselves. I think people go through coach training and they sort of foreclose on whatever model they were trained in as the gospel. And just a quick example of this, this common prohibition against asking why. You see it in coach training programs everywhere. You should never ask your client why because it sounds judgmental. And I just thought, well, that kind of sounds like it runs counter to things like start with why, or find out why people's reasons are, or even if you ask someone why do you think that is, you're sort of getting their narrative about causality and the actors involved. It could be a fruitful question. So when I started thinking about that, I was like, maybe we shouldn't ask why, or maybe we should ask why. But maybe the question isn't should we or shouldn't we? Maybe the question is when and how should we ask why?
Right.
And so one of my chapters is specifically about the why. And of course, the other 24, taking sort of a swipe at other kind of common assumptions that you find in the field. I don't really have that much investment in whether people agree with me. It was such a relief to write this book because I was like, I'm just going to say some stuff, like maybe ask why, maybe don't ask why. Like it's up
Mm-hmm.
to you. You get to make your own decision. And I wasn't trying to convince anyone, like we should definitely ask why, and here are 4 reasons why that's the case. And so I was just like, here's some things to think about as you arrive at your own conclusions. And that was such a liberating way to write a book, to not feel beholden to like convince anyone of anything. So it was a joy.
It was joy reading it, I have to say, and I very much like the positioning that you're just musing about those some of those beliefs in a coaching field, and especially the title "Positive Provocation." I hope put people at ease when they picked up this book and read it, because that's what it is. It is provocation to some. It is like, well, of course, to others, but very interesting food for thought for many. And in coaching, we do talk about right now. ICF is celebrating 30th anniversary this year. Right, time flies when you're having fun. And we have some people who have been in the field for a long time. The field changed, the research behind it changed, and yet some of the beliefs perhaps have not. And we hear it quite a bit from ICF. MCC coaches, that when you get to this level, it is easy to develop a blind spot. It is easy to say, like, I accomplished it all, while those positive provocations, I think, could have opened the eyes and minds and hearts in some cases to different way of looking at coaching. So since you are a researcher as well and a teacher, which I think it is so important that we bring the new things to coaching education, how do you see the evolution of the profession?
Oh, I don't think I've been in it quite as long as you have. I think my first ICF conference was 2006. So about 20
I
years
joined in
ago.
2005. Hey, we're almost
Oh,
twins.
okay. Yeah, we're contemporaries. That's great. Um, but yeah, it's changed so much, and in ways large and small. Of course, everyone is talking about AI these days. I mean, there's some obvious sort of structural changes, but even just the proliferation. There's just so many more coaches. I mean, the types of things. Literally, when we started, it was all telephone based. I never saw my clients. I was still having to explain that I wasn't a sports coach
Oh,
back then.
yes.
I mean, it still felt like you were kind of waving the banner and trying to establish it, even though I recognize that there were people with a decade or more of experience more than me that had paved the way for me. And now I think people can just sort of come in and say I'm a coach, and people know what that is. In some ways, we're so well established that now there's some stereotypes about life coaches, or some things that they might have to work against there. Um, but I think that it's better accepted at all levels of organizations, which I find really, really wonderful. It's not just executives, but I've worked with organizations where absolutely every member across the organizational hierarchy has access to coaching.
Right.
And I think that to me is like one of the most amazing sort of I don't know, like accomplishments of coaching
Yeah.
is the proliferation of coaching and its acceptance.
I would agree, and we consider coaching in organizations being really quite a significant accelerator of the awareness of coaching and also acceptance and use of coaching, especially by those organizations who, to your point, have a wisdom of understanding that probably just coaching one person is not going to change the entire organization, but rather giving the same language and understanding to throughout the enterprise has a better chance of delivering strategic objectives wherever they might be. So
Yeah.
this is great. So why radical listening, Robert?
Uh, Radical Listening, the most recent book, was born out of the pandemic, actually. So like many coaches, a lot of my work dried up during that time. I had a lot of free time, a lot of uncertainty. It was an anxious period. And me and my co-author, Christian Van Nieuwerburg, we knew one another a bit because we'd seen one another at conferences and were in each other's orbits, but we didn't really know one another well. And we were just looking to connect. And so we got on Zoom every week for just a few hours, and we would just have free ranging discussions, things like, just conversations like, what kind of language should you use with clients? Do you have an obligation to model behaviors if you're a coach?
Mhm.
We talked about everything under the sun, and we're really different from one another. Christian grew up in Lebanon during a period of war. His mother is Japanese. Arabic is his first language, but he's a Belgian citizen. He's got this very kind of worldly, cultural, respectful listening approach. I grew up more argumentative. Some might, from the outside, say a less respectful listening approach. And one of the things is we found that we really respected one another, even though we had very different styles.
Mhm.
And we were like, wait, we should write about this. Like, we should take the best of your listening, the best of my listening, go find out what other information about listening there is, and just see if we have something new to say about listening, because listening, I think, needs a refresh. And I'm just going to say something provocative here real quickly.
Positively provocative.
Everyone has been trained in active listening, and I think summarizing what the client said for clarification is an overused skill. And I
Mm.
think people often use it to buy time. So if your client says, I'm really afraid I'm going to get fired if I don't get my numbers up, you don't really have to clarify that. To me, like, if you heard that, like, if you just go, oh, that's an appropriate response to what they said. You don't have to say, so what I hear you saying is that your job is in jeopardy because of perceived low performance. I mean, that's sort of obvious. Now, I do think summary can be used. I'm not trying to dismiss it as a skill. I think it can be beautifully used, but I think people just sort of default to it. And the idea that what we're trying to do by listening is communicate understanding is just such a narrow slice of listening. And so we were like, okay, it needs a refresh. We're not going to get rid of active listening. We like active listening, but we think it should be a many splendored thing and we should build on it in many ways. So that's where our motivation came from.
Well, that is so interesting, especially that in every aspect of our lives, not necessarily coaching alone, we do talk about having to be better communicators, and being a better communicator definitely starts with being a better listener as well. So in your book, you talk about the 6 core. Well, I do have them in front of me: noticing, quieting, accepting, acknowledging, questioning, and interjecting. Is any one of them more important than others?
Um, I think there is a foundational thesis that is underneath all of those that is the most important. So I'll say this because I assume most people here are coaches or use coaching like skills in their work. One of the things I think about coaches is that coaches are sort of exceptionally present and pretty good at listening and noticing. Like I think as a group of people, we've learned those skills. We can sort of turn up the volume on it. We can activate it during a session. So that's the good news. The bad news is I think that we probably overestimate how much we're taking in because we're pretty good at it. So the truth is way attention works, you just can't take in everything. You cannot simultaneously listen to the language choices the client is making while also reading their microfacial expressions, while also paying attention to shifts in their energy, while also paying attention to their cultural context and also what they're leaving out, what's not being said. That's too much at once for the human brain. And because we're going to be selective in our listening anyway by default, what Christian and I argue is that listening is intentional and it's motivated. So I'll give you a quick 3 examples. You might listen to a conversation in order to entertain, or you might listen in order to validate, or you might listen in order to learn. And regardless of what you do, that intention is going to direct your attention. You're going to carve off a different slice of the conversation. So for example, people who are listening to entertain are paying extra attention to pauses because pauses are where you insert jokes. People who are listening to validate, they are listening more for emotional tone, right? To understand the person's subjective experience. People who are listening to learn are paying particular attention to keywords, connections, links, inconsistencies, things like that. So if you just go into a conversation thinking, here's what I'm trying to accomplish through my listening, it's going to make your listening more efficient because you're going to kind of target your listening. And then you use the 6 skills that you just mentioned. Things like, am I aware of what I'm noticing? How am I doing it? Acknowledging what I'm noticing or questioning what I'm noticing. Skills that will in large part be familiar to coaches.
Right. That's fascinating. So you mentioned a very interesting background of your co-author, and you just mentioned also the language the client uses, including the language, which may not be a first mother tongue for a person. Does that how in your experience, how does it impacts the coaching conversation and the ability or the need of listening?
Are you referring specifically to coaching outside of a person's first language?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. As much as we want to say, there's no power dynamic in coaching, as a native English speaker, when I'm coaching with someone who English is not their first language, I am aware of their English proficiency. And I am sometimes modifying my English. I do have a penchant for using arcane language if I'm just speaking normally, but I might not say words like penchant or arcane with every single client because that's some, pretty specific vocabulary. Now, I'm not trying to say that I'm trying to dumb down my English because, obviously people speak beautiful English, even as a second or third language. But they also might have different sense because of their linguistic programming about their facility with metaphor, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And some of that's personality too. Some people are just more abstract in their thinking than others. But definitely, I'm aware of it. I've definitely, for example, I was coaching someone who's a native Spanish speaker, and they were sort of just having a hard time answering the question that I had asked.
Mm.
And just on a hunch, I just said, "Well, just answer it in Spanish instead. Like I won't be able to understand it, but just go ahead and answer it in Spanish and see how that is." And I'm still paying attention to their energy level and how excited they are. See if there's something kind of coming out of them. But it turned out that it sort of like unlocked a little something for them.
Yeah, yeah, because there is one thing about the language that the coach uses, so he or she are understood correctly, right? But this is also that English is not my first tongue. I speak 5 languages, so it is different listening. In my experience, it is, since we're talking about listening, it is different listening, because if somebody is not native to a language, they may use constructs that are perfectly fine in their mother tongue, and they translate sometimes a little awkwardly to another language. And I think it is a bit of a special skill for a coach to be able to see the nuance and
Mhm.
get the actual intended meaning from that conversation, rather than what may be a bit of a superficial what you would hear when you just hear the sentence coming out of their mouth. So that's interesting.
Yeah. Although sometimes those little kind of mistranslations can be quite charming. They almost have like a poetic aspect to them because they're creative use of English that a native speaker would never think to use. And
Right.
I wish I had a great example, but I've definitely kind of used that as sort of like an inside joke. Like the person knew that they weren't saying perfect English, but then we defaulted to that and we kept referring to it because it just became like, oh yeah, that we both know what we mean by this.
Right, right. Well, yeah, this is true. I guess in any relationship that you start developing a special words, only you know what it means. That's great. That's really fun. So, yeah, you mentioned at the beginning we all talk about AI and technology and where coaching is going. So, what's the crystal ball of Robert Biswas-Diener saying about the future of coaching?
I just have a question. I don't know anything more than anyone else knows. That's not like I went and got a doctorate in AI while the rest of you were just on Chat GPT or whatever. So I don't think I have a bunch of expert knowledge. But here's something that occurred to me. I mean, lots of people are saying, okay, we're going to be coaching with AI. AI is going to assist coaches in so many different ways, and you're all probably familiar with that. But the one part that seems to be left out of the conversation to me is that our clients will also have AI. And I just never hear people talk about that. They're like, how will coaches use AI? But I'm like, but you're coaching two people. You're coaching an AI and a person. And are there going to be instances where our AI is talking to their AI or interfacing in ways? Are we really looking somehow at some kind of like weird group coaching now? And I have no idea about the answers, but I think it's an intriguing line of inquiry to pursue.
It certainly is, and from two perspectives. One is that, as you said, the clients are using AI in many different aspects of their life. So I think, depending, of course, on an individual preference, and to some extent, we're forced to use it even if we don't know AI is behind it, right? So I think there would be a certain expectation of the patterns, procedures, ease of use, because that's what happens to us in our lives. But yeah, it is fascinating, because you probably won't be terribly surprised that many coaches are afraid of AI. And it is, I think, because they quite do not know enough. We at ICF are preparing this series of webinars, just educational things about, hey, you might choose not to use the tools, but be familiar, know what's out there, and it may help you. It may help your client. And yep, there are developments that may be I actually think that the word disruptive is a good word. We need to stay on our toes and be relevant to the extent that we can. And AI is yeah, it's giving us something to think about and to incorporate also in the teaching of coaching. So yeah, research being one part, but really the adoption of the tools and opportunities that it creates is an important thing to consider moving forward. Well, as always, we're go.
I was just going to say, I'm so happy that the ICF is taking the lead in this and helping people navigate through the AI issue. That's great. So bravo
Yeah,
to you.
we already issued we work with the coalition of different people involved in the development of coaching AI coaching tools, and we have the standards of coaching AI coaching already available and working with platforms. So coachingfederation.org, go check it out. Robert, we are at the end of our time. As always, we always say in our prep, oh, it's 20 minutes, 25. Yeah, at 30-minute mark, we're at the end of it. So I want to thank you so very much for being with us. And yes, you have right now the website for Robert, and of course, do check this most recent book, Radical Listening. But I really recommend Positive Provocation. It's a fun read. So Robert, thank you so much for being with us today. And any parting comment to our listeners?
Yeah, just pay attention maybe this week to being really listened to and think about how that feels so that can motivate you to sort of pass it on to others.
That's great. That's a fantastic advice for all of our listeners and myself. So Robert, thanks again. And to everybody looking at us right now, watching us, I'll see you next month.
Thanks so much.